commanding the wind and the sea to obey. Strength is wielding a slingshot to the face of a giant. Strength is standing in solidarity with the powerless. Strength is turning the cheek and loving an enemy. We come to worship God, who redefines our vision with strength. In 1 Samuel, we hear the story of David and Goliath. It's probably one of the most familiar stories in the Bible. It's a story of a shepherd's bravery and trust in God. It is about a young man being prepared. One thing we must be honest about: Christian faith does not guarantee a storm-free life. Trouble comes in a lot of ways, and we can't always avoid it. But what we can do is trust in the one who brings us through and who strengthens us in the storms. Our God is stronger than the storms. Now you envision the battle scene in your minds. There's two mountains with a large valley in between them. On one mountain you have the Philistines, and on the other hand, on the other mountain you have the Israelites. Both come to battle. While the Israelites and the Philistines are seizing each other up, the champion warrior come out of the Philistines' camp is named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. That's 9.5 feet tall. I wouldn't want to meet this guy in the dark alley. That'd be a load. Goliath was covered with the best armor of the day. His armor weighed a whopping 148 pounds. Goliath's shield was carried by one of the Philistines, and his spear weighed 17 pounds. Goliath challenged the Israelites in all his fierceness, stood before them, and taunted them. Goliath wanted them to send out their champion and fight, and this would decide the battle, which is not a bad idea, really, at least to save the rest of the army. And when the Israelites heard this, they showed themselves to be cowards. They were greatly afraid. David arrives on the scene. He's the youngest son of Jesse. He went to the camp of the Israelites to bring food. As David came near and greeted his brothers, Goliath comes forth and taunted the Israelites, as he had been doing for the last 40 days. Each time Israel trembled in fear. As I go along, notice what David says. The people tell David that Saul has offered his daughter in marriage and wealth to anyone who can defeat Goliath. David volunteers to fight Goliath. David says, "Let no man's courage fail, he will fight." David seems to in anger say that Goliath will end up like this lion and bear because he has defied the armies of the living God, a kingly attitude. David is armed for the fight. Saul puts his best armor on David, but David's unaccustomed to the armor and removed it. Instead of the armor, David took his staff and a sling and 5 smooth stones he gathered from the brook in the valley of Elah. And I'd like to mention that sling. It's not like the slingshots we used to use. You get there with a rubber band and shoot the birds or whatever. That's a slingshot. It's made out of leather, and you take one end and both ends and you put the rock in the center and you whirl it around like this or over your head, and you release one end and that rock flies out there. It takes a lot of skill to do that. I don't think I could hit a barn doing that myself. But apparently David was experienced with this because he was a shepherd, and he killed lions and bears according to what he said. The sling was twirled around his head. David, being a shepherd, probably used the sling several times. What's it saying to me is David has trust in God, but the fact that he picked up 5 stones, as he not only was counting on God to help him, but he was helping himself as well. Sometimes we count on God doing for us what we need him, but we also have to help ourselves with God's help. So whatever our obstacles are, be moral, enemy, or health obstacle, or anything in our lives, we need God, but we also need to help ourselves. David goes to Goliath, and when Goliath saw David, of course, he had to give him a little jab about what to do. Send a boy out here with sticks? I'm a Philistine. He bragged about how he's going to kill him, and cut his head off, and that cutting the head off, that must have been the thing back then. And you notice David's reaction. And David took the sling, he wound that puppy up, and he let her go, and he hit Goliath in the forehead. I don't know if it was luck or skill. Anyway, it sunk in his head and killed Goliath. And David cut his head off and fed it to the birds. We look back on this event in Hebrew history and learn a few valuable lessons that will help us to be more faithful today. David has seen how all Israel is afraid to confront Goliath. David knew it was up to him. Goliath had defied the armies of God and needed to be taken down. If you notice, David ran to the fight. All fighting for the Lord was not always a physical battle. There are many great men and women in the Bible willing to fight for the Lord. Noah fought for the Lord, even though his family were the only righteous ones left on earth. Abraham was willing to do whatever the Lord required of him, without question, in Genesis 12 and 22. Joseph stood his ground for the Lord against Potiphar's wife. Joseph said, "How can I do this great wickedness and sin against God?" in Genesis 39:9. Elijah fought for the Lord to the point that Ahab and Jezebel wanted to kill him. John the Baptizer literally lost his head for fighting for truth and morality. Peter and John in Acts 4 and 5 fought for the Lord even though the Sanhedrin warned not to. Paul fought for the Lord to the point that he was stoned and left for dead in Acts 14:19. We need to fight for the Lord just like these great men of the past have done. Fight the good fight of faith in 1 Timothy 6:12. These great men and women of faith went through great hardships in fighting for the Lord. They were stoned, they were tortured, imprisoned, and even suffered death. They had not received the promise, but we have. How much more then should we be fighting for the Lord? We need to be like David, who fought for the Lord, even when no one else would. Lack of trust in God was the reason that all of Saul's army were afraid to meet Goliath in battle. David, though, trusted in God and was willing to face an awesome task. David had trusted the Lord before and was not let down. Without trust in God, David would have been just like the rest of the Israelites. David's trust in God was clearly seen in 1 Samuel 17 through 47. We need this trust in God today. We need this type of trust in times of adversity. We need this trust in God over men. The Israelites were putting trust in themselves and therefore were afraid. Men will let us down. God will not. We need David's attitude. We know that David trusted in God, But we still see David collecting 5 stones instead of 1. David wanted to be prepared. God was David's armor, but David still had to do his part in preparing himself. God always wants us to do our part. We are in a battle today, and we must prepare ourselves. How? Putting on the whole armor of God. We acquire the armor to study and apply the word to our lives. Are you ready to fight the Goliaths of today? The Goliaths of sin, the Goliaths of false doctrine, Goliaths of apathy. Will we be victorious